This was the easiest album review I've ever written. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a lovely day. My name is Justin, and today we are reviewing Miles Davis' album Kind of Blue, released in 1959, probably the most famous jazz album of all time. In case you're wondering why we're doing this review really quick, I had posted a poll on Twitter, specifically for all my Twitter followers. I gave them a list of 4 albums for me to review, and this is the one that most of you over there on Twitter had chose. So here we are. This album just feels like the epitome of cool. My personal history of this album, I heard it when I was about 19 years old. It was in September of 2008. Thank you, RYM, for keeping track of all my album listens. This album changed the way that I listened to jazz and how I approached jazz. I had always been brought up around it, my dad being very, very into jazz music, so it was always around. But it wasn't until I actually took the time to listen to jazz that I began to really understand it and develop my own relationship with it. And this being one of the most highly rated albums and most acclaimed albums, this was the one that I listened to first, and what an introduction it was. At a cursory glance and a cursory listen, some of it may come across very simple, very understated, but I think that once you give it time and once you really allow yourself to absorb it, it begins to reveal its secrets and its treasures. It's not just a nice album, it's a great album, an essential album. Based on modality, the musicians were given basic premises and melodic outlines to play with, and this would allow them a little bit more space to improvise. Contrary to being locked into standard chordal structures and things like that, this allowed a new kind of freedom and a new kind of light to be shed. And I think it's really cool how even though the album is built from these improvisations and these basic outlines and these sketches, listen to how catchy some of these melodies are. If you listen to this album, you're going to come away with some of those lines just absolute earworms, you know? And so with just a few hours time, some basic outlines and sketches, the recording process for this essential album began. So what, the first track opens up with Chambers so warmly introducing us into the sextet, into all the musicians with just some very warm bass. He invitingly sets up the stories and the solos to unfold, Miles being the first to bat with the trumpet, of course. He just approaches the track with controlled heat, wicked sustain, subtle changes, just quiet restraint, and yet powerful. One thing that I appreciate about this track, but also the album in general, is the production and just how close and intimate the setting is. Not only between them and us, the listener, but also unto themselves totally. You can feel the personal space between each of the members in this album and throughout its tracks. You can hear each member dedicated and quietly reading one another when trading solos, when bouncing off of ideas and changes, and overall just building mood. Coltrane and Adley complement each other very nicely, tonally very, very pleasing. The first playing slightly less subtle, but still moderate, and then the latter with a very playful grace. Bill Evans. Love Bill Evans on the piano. He continues this journey with his solo. He's floating across these thematic chords of the song, kind of like a swan on a lake, if I can make that comparison. It's an elegant and very exciting track to open up the album, and personally, I think that it leaves me satisfied, wanting more, but still satisfied. Freddie Freeloader is probably one of the most famous tracks on this album, possibly the most well-known one on this one. I think that I actually first heard this song in some SimCity game. I'm not sure which one or anything, but I'm pretty sure it was featured in the soundtrack to one of the SimCity games that I played when I was a kid. This track is just a summer stroll through a city park. It is cheerful in its swing, in its rhythm. The melodies, once again, are just irresistibly catchy. I love the theme that plays before the solos begin. It's just, I don't know. The walk of the bass and Evan's very carefree solo mark the beginning of just a good time. It's just totally stress-free. It is so relaxed. The sax solo's about halfway through are very evocative of when the sun comes out from behind the clouds and the light hits just right. And then the bass solo from Chambers is just pleasant to listen to. It's just as lighthearted as everything else that we've heard in this album. Blue and Green is genuinely one of the most beautiful songs that I know. When I first heard that song, I can't even describe the feeling when I heard that song. It is one of my favorite jazz pieces of all time, like no doubt. From the romantic and whispery opening lines of the piano to the excited first breath of the trumpet from Miles. This is a ballad that begs to move the soul. And yet, it does not beg to move the soul. It just moves. Out of this blue fog that's been created, you have Evans, who just kind of peeks out little bits of sunlight and sun rays, ever so gently melting away this mood that's been established and foreshadowing the wonderful ending chords at the end of this track. I just think that that is a lovely, nice like hint towards what's later to come, because when it does come, it's like, I don't know, it just feels different. And then I also got to say that the chemistry between Miles and Evans here is near palpable. It's almost like a dance between the sun and the moon. You can feel them eclipsing each other and yet balancing each other. All Blues picks things up a little bit. I love the quiet rushing of the brushes and the drums and the piano as well here, while the two saxophones just kind of lazily swing back and forth like a melodic pendulum. Miles playing in unison with those saxophones is really neat as well. There's a nice symmetry and contrast in the lines. One thing that I think is cool about this particular track is that it feels like the sum of some of the other tracks that we heard in this album. It takes on the energy of a track like Freddie Freeloader, but on the other hand, it takes on the whiskey-like smoothness of So What. The mood here is very smoky and atmospheric, as if you were in a jazz club after the performers were finished on the stage. The high of the band is still there, the energy from the audience and the crowd still lingers in the air, and there's something about knowing we're close to the end of the album, but there's still a very unique vibe going on. I would go to say that this is the most organic and natural sounding that all of the musicians here sound together. They noticeably feel more comfortable here in this track. Not that they felt uncomfortable before, but here it sounds like they're actually and really locking into one another. If All Blues was the stage musicians and performers putting away their instruments and closing down their sets, I think that Flamenco Sketches feels like the bar closing down, the club closing down. Unfinished drinks are removed from the bar, the sign at the door is turned, the lights are put down, and closing hour begins. There's definitely a moodier atmosphere in this track that rings in a very conclusive and fitting, appropriate ending for this album. Living up to its title, it does feel like sketches, drafts, and outlines in which the musicians are left to fill in with color. Miles being a moody blue, vibrant purple haze from Coltrane, frisky yellow from Adderley, and splashes of green from Evans. I don't even know what frisky yellow means. Space and patience is king and key in these moments, truly giving each of the members of the sextet their moment to shine, their moment to display their own heart, and giving them their space in the room, giving them their final bow before the curtain is closed. And once those curtains are closed and drawn, after 45 minutes of listening to this album, I have to say that it leaves me feeling kind of blue. I'm completely satisfied. I'm left like totally happy, and yet I want more. Anyways, those are just a couple of my thoughts on each of the tracks on this album, but let's get into my favorite moment and my song rankings. So my favorite moment on the album is just the few first notes that are blown by Miles in Blue and Green. The setup with the piano is just so romantic and subtle, but it's those first few notes from Miles that really like lights my fire. It is a moment that I always look forward to. Evans sets it up so wonderfully, and then Miles just blows it away. And like that is just that's just one of those moments I am always looking forward to, no matter what. And then my song rankings for the album: Blue and Green, Freddie Freeloader, So What, All Blues, Flamenco Sketches. There's nothing I've probably said about this album that hasn't been said already, but this is essential listening if you are in the least bit interested in jazz, and to be honest, just music history. This is an album you got to listen to. Maybe on the first few listens, it's just a nice album, but give it some time. It'll be more than just a nice album. It's interesting to study it from a musical point of view and a theory point of view, but it's also just interesting to listen to and absorb what each of these like world-class musicians were doing at the time. Anyways, thank you so much for spending just a few minutes out of your day here with me on the channel. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you enjoyed your review. Of course, you're more than welcome to join me in the comments and let me know your thoughts on the album. You can follow me on Twitter, as sometimes it's a benefit. And you can also support the channel on Patreon if you feel so inclined. But for now, I hope that you have a wonderful day, guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow.